All right, so today we're really diving deep into this idea of, well, elite deception, something that seems to be on a lot of people's minds lately. We've got this article here, it's called Educational Article, Exposing Deceptive Practices of Global Elites. And let me tell you, it doesn't hold back.
Yeah, it really captures this current of distrust that we're seeing, especially towards, people in power, the media, traditional sources of information, that sort of thing.
And that seems to be the jumping off point for this whole thing. The article talks about how trust in especially mainstream media has really taken a hit, and they link it directly to the pandemic. Like, that's when it really accelerated.
Hmm.
What do you think about that connection?
Well, it's interesting, right? It's like the pandemic with all the conflicting information, all the uncertainty, it kind of pushed people to start questioning everything. And then you have the rise of alternative media, which just adds another layer to the whole thing.
Right, and the article even mentions these, like, discrepancies in video views as potential evidence that algorithms are being used to silence certain viewpoints. It's kind of a chilling thought, isn't it? Like, there's this hidden hand controlling what we see online.
It's true that algorithms have a huge influence on what we see. Absolutely. It's like, think about your social media feed for a second. The algorithm is always trying to figure out what to show you based on like what you've clicked on before, who you follow, things like that.
So you're saying it's not necessarily that someone is actively censoring content, but the way these algorithms work can create this sort of distorted view of the world.
Exactly. You get stuck in what they call an echo chamber, surrounded by information that just reinforces what you already believe.
So how do we break out of that?
That's the million-dollar question. I think it starts with being really aware,
Yeah.
aware of these algorithms, aware of our own biases, and actively trying to find different perspectives.
So critical thinking is more important than ever.
100%. And this leads into another big claim in the article, the whole idea that conspiracy theories are gaining traction. They even bring up people like Candace Owens, Senator John Kennedy, as examples of public figures who are echoing these ideas. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's like ideas that might have been dismissed as fringe a few years ago are now being taken seriously by some pretty prominent figures. It makes you wonder what's shifted.
Right. And I think it goes back to that distrust we were talking about. When people feel like they can't trust the traditional sources of information, they're more likely to look for answers elsewhere.
So it's not about just dismissing these theories outright, but trying to understand why they're resonating with people right now.
Exactly. What's driving that need for alternative explanations? What are people afraid of? What are they angry about?
That's a really good point. And this kind of leads into how the article talks about these big international organizations like the UN and the WHO. It frames them almost as these puppet masters, pulling the strings, pushing a globalist agenda.
Right. And they use the example of, remember those really strict lockdowns in Australia? Especially that local council trying to push back against the mandates. They present that as evidence of this, like global power grab.
It's a powerful image, the idea of these global entities dictating policies that impact our everyday lives.
Mhm.
What do you make of this whole globalist agenda concept?
Well, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, globalism itself, it's not inherently good or bad, right? You need some level of global cooperation to address big issues, like think about climate change or future pandemics, things like that. But at the same time, it's totally understandable that people would be worried about, losing their national identity, their sovereignty.
Yeah, finding that balance between working together on global issues
Yeah.
and respecting the autonomy of individual nations is a tough one.
For sure. It's something that needs to be discussed and debated, but it's often oversimplified. This article definitely leans into a more conspiratorial interpretation of it all.
Right, it's not always black and white.
Yeah.
And speaking of complex issues, the article then jumps into some really thorny territory health, specifically vaccines and the whole debate around their potential side effects.
Yeah, and they point to Slovakia banning certain products as part of this, like, global pushback against mandates that they're talking about.
It's something we've seen everywhere, this growing distrust in health institutions, the pushback against mandates, the whole thing.
It's definitely a trend. And it's tough because, on the one hand, it's so important to do your own research, be critical, right? But on the other hand, not all information is created equal, and it's easy to get lost in the weeds.
So how do we even begin to navigate these complicated health topics when there's so much conflicting information flying around?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's like,
Oh, yeah.
it's about finding those, reliable sources, the ones you can trust to cut through all the noise and give you the straight facts.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, for sure. But we don't have to go it alone, right? There are organizations, experts who are trying to make sense of it all. I mean, the CDC, the WHO, reputable medical journals, they can be a good starting point.
Right, sticking with sources that have a track record. Good advice. Okay, hold on to your hats, folks, because this article takes a serious turn. We go from vaccines straight into weather control.
Yeah, this is where things start to get a little out there. They even bring up those old projects like Project Cirrus and HARP,
Huh.
trying to use them as proof that weather manipulation is a real thing.
Okay, I'll admit those names always sound a bit like a sci-fi movie to me.
Yeah.
For those of us who haven't exactly been to meteorology school, can you break those down? What were they really about?
Yeah, no, you're not alone. Project Cirrus, way back in the 40s, it was this attempt to influence hurricanes. They tried seeding them with dry ice, if you can believe it.
It didn't work.
Well, not really. I mean, it had limited success at best, and it sparked a whole bunch of ethical questions, like should we even be messing with hurricanes like that? And then you've got HARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, which always seems to be at the center of these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, HARP, it even sounds kind of ominous, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's a research facility in Alaska. They study the ionosphere, that upper layer of the atmosphere.
So what, they're controlling the weather from Alaska?
Not quite. They use these powerful radio waves, but it's to temporarily excite a tiny part of the ionosphere so they can study how it affects things, like radio communications and stuff.
So no controlling hurricanes or causing earthquakes.
Not even close. But, this article tries to connect these projects to recent natural disasters as if they were intentionally caused.
It's definitely a scary thought.
Yeah.
But is there any real science behind any of this? Like, could we actually control the weather on that kind of scale?
Honestly, influencing the weather in a big way and in a controlled way, it's way beyond what we can do right now. I mean, yeah, we can seed clouds to try to make it rain or study how to maybe lessen the impact of hurricanes. But this idea that we can weaponize the weather, like in the movies, that's still pure science fiction.
That's good to hear, at least. But, it makes you think, in a world where information, real or fake, spreads like wildfire, how are we supposed to tell what's true?
That's the million-dollar question these days, isn't it? And it's not just about the information itself, it's how it's presented, the emotions it plays on. Take this article, for instance. It really taps into those primal fears we all have, fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of these powerful forces working against us.
It's like one of those thriller movies come to life.
Exactly. And just like in those movies, it's so easy to get caught up in the suspense of it all, the intrigue, that you don't stop to think, wait, is any of this even possible?
So how do we become more discerning viewers? How do we develop that critical eye you were talking about before?
It's tough. I mean, for one thing, you got to be aware of your own biases.
Biases.
Yeah, we all have them. Those deeply held beliefs, assumptions we have about the world. And when we see something that seems to confirm those beliefs, we tend to just accept it, no questions asked.
So, if you already believe in, say, a conspiracy theory, you're more likely to grab onto any evidence that supports that, even if it's not very strong evidence.
Exactly. It's called confirmation bias. We seek out information that confirms what we already believe, and we kind of ignore stuff that challenges it.
So it's like we're building a case for what we already think instead of looking at all the evidence objectively.
100%. And it's something we all do. It's not always intentional. But to be a critical thinker, you got to recognize when you might be doing this. You have to actively look for different viewpoints.
Okay, so it's not just about checking the facts, but also checking your own perspective.
Exactly. Be open to the idea that you might be wrong.
Which is never fun.
Okay.
Okay, before we go any further, I gotta say, this article goes to some really dark places. It brings up the Jeffrey Epstein case, all those awful accusations of child trafficking, and it hints that there's this whole network of powerful people involved, people who are basically above the law.
Yeah, it's disturbing stuff. It really plays on our worst fears, doesn't it? The idea that there's this kind of corruption, this abuse of power happening right under our noses.
And the article really focuses on the fact that Epstein's client list, like who he was connected to, it's never been fully released, which of course gets the rumor mill going.
Right. It's like when there's that lack of transparency, that's when suspicion and distrust can really take root.
It's almost like the lack of information becomes the information, you know? We start filling in the blanks ourselves, and we don't always paint a pretty picture.
Yeah, it makes you think, right? Like, what are the systems that are supposed to be in place to hold these people accountable? Are they even working?
It's definitely a question that sticks with you after reading something like this. And it brings us back to this idea of distrust that we've been talking about this whole time. Distrust in the media, in these big institutions, the people in charge. It's everywhere.
It's like the common thread, isn't it? Connecting all these different things we've talked about, vaccines, this globalist agenda, weather control, even the Epstein case. It all comes back to this feeling that something isn't right, that something is being hidden.
And it's a powerful feeling. It's like exhilarating almost, like you're waking up to some hidden truth. But then at the same time, it's terrifying because what if that truth is way darker than you imagined?
It's like stepping off the edge of the map, right? Into the unknown. And when you're in that place of uncertainty, it's easy to fall down these rabbit holes of fear and speculation.
Yeah, it's like that moment in a scary movie when the lights go out, you know. You're fumbling around in the dark, your senses are heightened, and you don't know what's real anymore.
And in that state, it's so easy to like jump at shadows, see connections where there are none.
So how do we deal with that? How do we navigate this stuff without losing ourselves in it?
It's not easy. It takes effort, you know?
Yeah.
Being willing to question everything, even your own assumptions, and searching for different perspectives, even if they make you uncomfortable.
It's like we have to be skeptical, but
Hey.
not just of the information, of ourselves too, right? Like check yourself before you wreck yourself kind of thing.
Exactly, because our gut reactions, those immediate feelings of like fear or anger, they can be manipulated. So we have to train ourselves to take a breath, to ask, okay, where is this information coming from? Is this a reliable source? What's the evidence here? And maybe most importantly, what's the agenda?
Mm. We have to be like smarter consumers, not just of information, but of our own emotion.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's not about blindly accepting or rejecting everything you hear. It's about really engaging your brain, weighing the evidence, being open to having tough conversations.
And maybe those tough conversations, especially the ones that make us squirm a little, maybe those are the most important ones to have.
Yeah. It's when you feel that discomfort, that cognitive dissonance, that's when you know you're being challenged. That's when you have the opportunity to learn and grow and expand your worldview.
That's a good way to look at it.
Right.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive, hasn't it? We've covered so much ground from the media to global politics, health controversies, even weather control. Who knew?
I know, right? And I think if there's one takeaway from all of this, it's that the world is complex. There are rarely easy answers, and things are not always as they seem.
For sure.
Ah,
But the more informed we are, the better equipped we are to deal with that complexity.
100%. So to our listeners, if you take away anything from today's deep dive, let it be this. Stay curious. Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions and challenge what you think you know.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What will you choose to explore next? What rabbit holes are you curious about? Until next time, stay curious.